Anabolic steroids are synthetic substances that mimic or act like testosterone. Now, they do require a prescription for legal use. Their main job is to produce muscle proteins. Now, anabolic steroids only have a few accepted medical uses, including the treatment of delayed puberty. Add more testosterone, drive puberty to occur. Certain types of impotence. Testosterone is important for penile erection and maintaining the erection, and libido, obviously. Now, there are other wasting conditions where you're losing muscle mass, such as conditions associated with HIV infection and other diseases, where these anabolic steroids can help to build muscle. It needs to be closely monitored and used in the appropriate way. Remember, anabolic means to build. However, there are a lot of people that use these for the wrong reasons as performance enhancers to develop excess muscle tissue, such as you see in the image here on your slide. So it's not just men that use anabolic steroids to increase muscle mass, women do as well. Now, what does this lead to? Well, increased risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke, kidney damage, tumors in the liver, testicular atrophy, which means shrinkage, breast development in males. So your testes shrink and you develop more feminine breast. Bet you didn't think about that, huh? All right, so it can also lead to the production of acne, high blood pressure, and aggressive behavior. In women, growth of facial hair. How about that mustache there, cutie? And also it can interfere with your normal menstrual cycle because it affects your levels of estrogen as well. Now, we've talked about skeletal muscle. Let's take a really quick view at cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. You're going to get cardiac muscle in great detail in AP2, so we'll just briefly look at it here. But your cardiac muscle cells are short branching cells with 1 or 2 nuclei per muscle cell. They are striated because they contain sarcomeres. They have many mitochondria and therefore they create ATP using aerobic respiration. Now remember, the heart starts beating before you are ever born, and it beats approximately 75 times a minute until you die. So those muscle cells need lots of mitochondria to make all that ATP. But they also have a specialized structures called intercalated disc, as you can see here and here. Those are composed of desmosomes that keep the cells and the branches of the cells tightly held together during all that years and years of contracting 75 times a minute, and gap junctions that allow ions to flow from cell to cell. This helps to make sure that the autorhythmic pacemaker cells of the heart stimulate a few cells, and the gap junctions then allow sodium ions to flow into neighboring cells. This causes the heart to contract simultaneously and synchronously as a unit, rather than a patch of cells contracting here and another patch over there a few seconds later. Okay? So heart rate and contraction are influenced by the autonomic nervous system, primarily the fight or flight system that increases our heart rate when needed, but also we slow our heart rate down under the influence of the autonomic nervous system as well. Smooth muscle is found in many different places in the human body, and these cells are involuntary, just like your cardiac muscle. Cardiac's involuntary, like smooth muscle. It's striated, like skeletal muscle. But skeletal muscle is the only voluntary muscle type. We don't have to make our heart contract, nor do we have to contract the smooth muscle in our body. I want you to think about a tubular structure now that begins at the mouth. It goes through the mouth, down the pharynx, through the esophagus, down to the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and then finally to the anus, right? Now we left out several things, but that's the overview. So you got a long tubular structure from your mouth to your anus. Where do you control movement? Well, you control swallowing and you control pooping, right? Everywhere else along that tubular pathway, movement of your food products and then eventually waste products is controlled by smooth muscle. So smooth muscle is made up of spindle-shaped muscle cells that form sheets of muscle that wrap around your blood vessels and help to regulate blood pressure and direct blood flow where needed. We find this lining our bronchioles of the respiratory system, which control your airflow. We just mentioned the intestines, mixing and propelling food products along the pathway. In the ureters of your urinary system to move that filtrate from your kidneys to be stored in your urinary bladder. And in the uterus of the female so that we can push that baby out by contracting those muscles. Okay, looking just briefly at the microscopic anatomy, as I mentioned, the cells are somewhat spindle or fusiform shaped, so they're elongated and enlarged in the middle, come out to a more tapered end. They are smaller than your skeletal muscle cells. Of course, they have a sarcolemma, that's your cell membrane, but there are two different types of calcium, or many different types of calcium channels. Some of them are controlled by chemicals, voltage, or ligands, things that bind to those. Now, the transverse tubules are absent, very different structure than our skeletal muscle, but they do have these little invaginations that, and we call those calveolae. They actually increase the surface area of the sarcolemma. Now, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is very limited. So where's the calcium coming from? Well, calcium is primarily from outside of the cell, so basically from the interstitial fluid and that limited sarcoplasmic reticulum. Now, I included this overview just so you could see there's quite a bit of difference with our smooth muscle contraction. What's the first thing you notice? Ooh, there's no nerve cell up here, right? No motor neuron dropping acetylcholine. So the opening of the calcium channels is the first action we have here. Now, if you are in my lecture class, I'm not going to test you on how smooth muscle contracts. But I did want to show you it is initiated differently by opening those calcium gates. Everything happens differently. So we've got different components, the calmodulin. We've got different enzymes, the light chain kinase. So activation of the myosin head, we've still got to have the ATP hydrolyzed and get it into the cocked position. Still going to form a cross bridge, a power stroke, and reattachment. Now, it is really cool, but I'm not going that deep. I'm not going to test you that deep, okay? So let's just take one more quick look at this. So smooth muscle contraction is a little bit different. Well, actually, it's quite a bit different than skeletal muscle. There's a longer latent period, so the whole depolarization to contraction takes longer. It takes longer to phosphorylate the myosin head, add the phosphate. The ATPase, the enzyme, is slower. There's a longer duration of contraction because the calcium pumps are slower. We have to dephosphorylate the myosin head, remove the phosphate, and we have to undo this little latch bridge. So it's a special mechanism that keeps the myosin head attached to the thin filament. Now, the slowness fits the functional requirements though. I mean, think about what's going on right here with these two blood vessels. So this is a blood vessel with a very relaxed, smooth muscle lining. So the lumen or the opening is very big. That means the pressure is very low. Now, if we move right over here to the left side of the image, you can see the smooth muscle has contracted. The lumen is much smaller. So this would limit the blood flow to a particular area. So this contraction though, because it is slower to contract and slower to relax, it allows us to be able to control the flow much better than if that were skeletal muscle. The autonomic system also can control smooth muscle. So the nervous system releases from that autonomic nervous system neurotransmitters Some of these neurotransmitters act very differently depending on the organ that has that smooth muscle. So, for example, as you see here, the smooth muscle of the bronchioles will contract in response to acetylcholine and relaxes in response to norepinephrine. Okay, now acetylcholine causes skeletal muscle to contract, right? We've seen this. But what does it do for cardiac muscle? It slows contraction. So the autonomic nervous system has some strange actions on muscle, and we're going to learn much more about that. The response to stretch can also stimulate that muscle to contract. For instance, in the digestive system, the reason that the muscle contracts when you're pushing food through your digestive system is the smooth muscle gets stretched, and the response to that is to contract. That pushes things along the pathway in a rhythmic muscular contraction that we call peristalsis. Now, many other things can affect the way the smooth muscle contracts, including changes in pH, oxygen, CO2, certain drugs, and anything that affects the pacemaker cells that can initiate contraction.